Welcome to the Fearless Revolution. Courage is important, but taking fearful action is not a sustainable long-term strategy. If you want to take back control of your life and stop believing the lies that are holding you back, then you're in the right place. Join Sandy Gledhill, your fearless leader coach, as she reveals the secrets to living and leading fearlessly. Now, let's join the Fearless Revolution.
Hey, welcome back to the Fearless Revolution. I am Sandy Gledhill, and I am your fearless leader coach on this journey toward fearlessness. So today I want to talk about a subject I think is really important, and that is raising fearless children. Because I have a corporate background, I often speak to adults about adult issues. We talk about fearlessness as it relates to us in our careers and all of that amazing stuff. But what do we do as parents to raise fearless children while simultaneously balancing that with the need to also prepare our kids to live in this world? I mean, the world's kind of a scary place right now with pandemics and human trafficking and the abduction numbers, particularly in America. How do we protect our kids? How do we let them know what dangers are out there lurking, but at the same time, empower them to be fearless? That is the question that I want to address today. And I'm going to hit on three things that you can do to help your children be fearless. And I'm going to be using my own daughter, Emily, as a little bit of a case study on some things that I did right and some areas where I totally missed it while she was growing up, things I would do differently today. So I was a fairly young mother in my early 20s. I was a single mother. And I was often just doing the best I could with the tools and the information that I had at the time. However, I think partly because my destiny was to bring this message of fearlessness to the world. My identity, my true identity, as many of you have heard me talk about, was that I am brave, I am fearless, and I am a person that brings wisdom or problem solving into difficult and complex situations. Because of who I am on the inside, I think I lucked into doing a few things right with her just by the nature of who I was created to be. So, I'm going to talk to you today about the three things that I think you should really pay attention to when raising fearless children. The first I just mentioned, it is, of course, helping your children tap in to their true identity. Now, you may have heard me talk about this, but as it relates to your kids, there's a little twist. Our true identities are hiding in plain sight in that cross section between the area where we have natural skill. We have just a unique ability to do a thing. But that thing has often been criticized in us, discredited, dishonored, maybe even mocked and made fun of. So for me, that was my voice. My voice is kind of my superpower. I am destined to be a mouthpiece in the world because I have a message to bring. And as such, my voice was my superpower. I've always been able to speak. I've never been afraid to speak publicly. My voice has also been the thing that has most widely been criticized. When I was young, I spoke too much or too loudly or at inappropriate times. So my voice has been both honored and dishonored, credited and discredited, marveled at and mocked. So that cross section is where one of my aspects of true identity lives. When it's your children, there's a little twist. You're going to be looking for, as a parent, you have the great privilege of looking for that thing that your child tends toward naturally, the thing they're good at, the thing they want to do. And it's a little easier with kids because they haven't had the decades of having their true identity buried under the lies of fear, the expectations of society, the opinions of others. So they're a little bit fresher, if you will. And sometimes it's easier to see what comes naturally to that child. The cross section you want to look for is the thing that you probably punish them for most often, or the thing that is most often brought to your attention as an irritant. So this is where I want to use Emily as an example. Emily could argue. She was not a particularly stubborn child, but she could argue. And here's what I figured out along the way with Emily. If I just shut her down with the because I said so, because I'm the mother argument, which is the era I grew up in, right? We kids in the 70s, we didn't get explanations for anything. And you learn not to ask. But Emily was a child of the 90s and she wanted to know why. But it wasn't because she was being stubborn, and it really wasn't because she was trying to force her own agenda. What I found about Emily is that her arguing had a purpose. She had a deep need for her voice to be heard. She had a deep need to be a part of the decision-making process. Emily she wanted a seat at the table, even as a toddler. She wanted to be a part of adult decisions. Well, I am not the kind of mother who's going to abdicate my adult responsibilities to a toddler or a small child, but I did learn that I got a lot further down the road with Em when I would say to her, you can stop the arguing, because she would go into an immediate sort of frenzied argument the way a small child will. And I would say, you go to your room, spend some time with this issue, and you come back to me with a well thought out argument for this particular subject, and I will listen to you. And what I found, I was shocked really by this child's ability to come out with a 3 or 5 point proposition, an argument to how she wanted things to be. And what I realized was that if I would negotiate with her, that she was not trying to get her way as the only way all the time. She would actually adapt very quickly to my way of doing things if I would give in on a point or two. Being the adult in this relationship, I realized quickly that I could negotiate on the things I really didn't care that much about. Things that weren't of high importance to me, I could give in and find common ground with her. And what happened was that she learned to accept things she didn't want to do when she felt like her voice was heard and that she was a part of the decision-making process. What I have now found out, since she's now 28 years old and an attorney, very successfully working in her chosen field, she was actually born to argue. She makes arguments on behalf of other people. She advocates for those who can't advocate properly for themselves. And I realize now that if I had just tried to squash that thing in her that I found so irritating, I would have been doing myself and her a disservice. She can now operate more fearlessly in her career because she understands this aspect of her true identity. She was born to advocate, and part of that is arguing effectively. So look at your children's lives, if you have a spouse or a partner in this, get with them. If not, try to get a family member, somebody else who knows your child well, and problem solve through this with them. Figure out where is that cross section between what they are naturally amazing at and also that thing that gets them in trouble more than anything else. Right there in that pinpointed cross section is where you're likely to find at least one aspect of their true identity, and then help them practice this in healthy ways. Children often don't operate in their identity well because they just are not practiced. They need to, we talk about when our kids get older and leave for college, they're spreading their wings. we can help our kids spread their wings a little bit more effectively while they're still at home. So, identity is the first thing I want to talk about. The second thing is destiny. And I'm going to go through these first two pretty quickly because where I really want to spend the bulk of the time today is on this third point, which I have not spoken much about, but it's really the important one as it relates to raising fearless children. So, the second point is destiny. Once you uncover any aspect of your child's identity, and help them, I call it passion prospecting, right? Like you're out panning for gold, you're prospecting to determine what is your child passionate about? What do they love to do? Because your purpose really is born out of your passions. Your destiny lives in your desires. So it's important to sit with our kids and help them dream. Not everybody's a natural dreamer. I am not. When people would ask me when I was a kid what I want to be when I grow up, I didn't really know. I didn't spend a lot of time. I did not develop my dreaming capability until I was older. So sitting with your kids and dreaming with them, talking about their passions and their desires and the things that sound interesting to them, the things they've seen other people in the world do that look interesting to them, and then helping them to project themselves into that as an imagination. We talk about imagination as if it is just something that is utilized in childhood, but that's just not true. Your imagination is one of the most important tools that you have in your tool belt. Helping your child to develop their imagination so that they can see themselves doing various things later in life. Obviously, you have to make this age appropriate, but talking to them as if everything is a possibility. I think as parents, sometimes because we so desperately want the best for our kids, we tend to want to bring their options down to what is, quote, realistic. We want to bring their options down to something that we think they could really do. And I think we do them a disservice if we let them dream really big when they're young and dream with them and let them know and truly believe that anything's possible. Your world changer child might grow up to do the impossible. And just because you may have always had a dream for your child to be a doctor or a scientist or whatever, fill in the blank, it's really important to help our children find their own true identities and tap into their own true destinies. Because when I talk about resourcing your strengths and outsourcing your weaknesses, I speak on this a lot. And what that means is that finding that thing that you love that is so easy for you, it almost feels like it shouldn't be legal. Like, I shouldn't be able to make money doing this because it's just not even that hard for me. Finding that thing that you love that's easy for you and envisioning that like a swift moving river. If you jump in that river, even if you put forth very little effort, even if all you're doing is stabilizing yourself to kind of stay afloat, you are making progress. But if you put forth a little effort, maybe a few strokes to kind of help yourself along, think about how quickly you can move if you're propelling yourself forward in the same direction that the stream is moving. Now imagine those short bursts where we give our all, where we are just swimming full out. You are just zipping through this water because it's already swiftly moving and you are using all of your natural strength to propel yourself in that same direction. That is what will happen for your child when they can tap into their true identity and uncover their own destiny and then get in their proper lane and just start moving that direction. If you think you've got a better idea for them, just think you might be putting them in the wrong place, going the wrong direction, and have them swimming upstream, doing something that they're not naturally gifted at or something, God forbid they hate. And it's very difficult to live fearlessly when you feel like all of your effort. You're putting forth effort and you're not taking ground. This is one area where it is really helpful to feel fearless is when you're putting forth very little effort and taking incredible ground, making incredible strides, moving forward quickly. But if you're in the wrong place or going the wrong direction, you can be putting forth exhaustive effort and honestly be making very little progress or feel stagnant or even be moving backwards. That's why it's really an important thing to help our kids understand who they were created to be. And as parents, we want the best for them, but we have to be careful not to mistake what we think is best for them with what's actually best for them and what they were created to do. So, the third point I want to make, and this is where I really want to live for the remainder of this particular episode, is this idea of helping our children partner with their own intuition. So, if we live in kind of a scary world right now, it's important to make sure that our kids are prepared for the reality of the world that they've been born into. They have to know what's lurking out there. And we want to be honest with them. We don't want to shelter them too much so that when they're out on their own, they're unprepared. And we also don't want to give them information that's unnecessary or not age appropriate. And these are the balances that parents are always trying to make, right? But one thing that I think we fail to do as a society is to talk about instinct and intuition and the important part that it plays. So, right now, I want to talk about some of the actual dangers that face our kids as it relates to strangers and child abduction and human trafficking and some of these really horrific issues that our kids should not have to be aware of and dealing with, but that are out there nonetheless. We can help our kids to be aware, but also be confident and certain and live fearlessly if we explain to them that they were born with an intuition, with a knowing. Sometimes we call it the sixth sense, but it's really just this God given thing in you that is kind of a fail safe, especially when you're young. That's why we always say, like, children and animals can always tell when somebody's a little off. Kids are actually taught in our society to bury that, to squelch that intuition and not to trust it. And particularly, I'm just going to give it to you straight, particularly, we do this with girls. We do a wonderful job as parents teaching our kids to be polite, to be respectful, to adhere to the rules, to be aware of societal norms, how to fit in, how to be gracious and careful. And all of that is wonderful and necessary. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that. But I'm saying if that's our end game, we're missing it. Because when you teach your children that being polite and respectful and a rule follower is the end all be all, then when their instinct and their intuition tells them something is off, they're going to default to respectful politeness. So when Emily was little, here's how I balanced it with her. I talked to her about stranger danger. I did it in age appropriate language, and I only told her what was really what she could handle, with her level of understanding. And then I gave her permission to trust her gut. And it went something like this. If you're in a grocery store and all of a sudden you look up and you've gotten separated from mommy and you can't find me, and let's say a person comes into that aisle and that person makes you feel unsafe. You are allowed to be impolite and say, "Get away from me." You are allowed to ignore their questions, turn around and walk in the opposite direction or run. You are allowed, if that person is pursuing you, if that person comes after you and you actually feel very, very unsafe, You are allowed to yell and scream and even pull things off the shelves to bring other people over to create more safety in your environment. So she laughed and thought that was hilarious because the idea of pulling canned goods off a shelf in a grocery store was like, has mom lost her mind? But the reality is, I wanted her to know all the rules go out the window when you feel unsafe. Now, I did teach her not to start at a 10. You know, if she suddenly loses me, I don't expect her to start yanking things off shelves. But she was allowed to cry out for me, to yell, to tell other adults to get away from her, things that she would not dream of doing in a million years. I gave her permission to do if she felt unsafe. Now, here's the kicker. She has to know when she feels safe and unsafe. These are great things to practice. So let's say you're at the mall or at a park and you have an opportunity with your kid to sit there and go, hey, if you looked up and I was gone and that man over there came to you with a leash and said, hey, little girl, would you help me find my dog? Would that make you feel safe or unsafe? And then talk about why. Emily was well aware that adults never ask children for help. And if they do, they shouldn't. So if an adult ever came to her asking for her help, that was a sign, that was a trigger where she could say to herself, there is a problem here. Hey, little girl, can you help me find my daughter? Can you help me find my puppy? I will give you candy if you'll help me fill in the blank. Adults don't ask children for help, but it's not enough just to say that. You have to walk them through scenarios that will then help their little brains come up with additional scenarios and think through it. The other thing that I did with Emily, and this might be a little controversial and not everybody might want to do this. This is how I chose to deal with it. But because they were saying at the time that Emily was little in the 90s, they were saying never let yourself be taken to a secondary location. Don't ever get in the car. Do everything you have to do to keep from being moved from one location to another. And so what I taught Emily was that if somebody's going to take you somewhere that you don't want to go, do everything you can to not get in that car. But if you end up in the car, I'm going to give you some tools to deal with. The first was, if somebody has you in the car, look around for anything that will fit in the ignition. A coin that's sitting in the center console will work. Anything you have in your pocket, anything you can find that you can shove into that ignition before they come around and try to put their key in will keep them from being able to drive you. If they're already in drive and moving that car forward, you look for the first opportunity to throw yourself down onto their foot that's on the accelerator and at a red light, create a little fender bender. Yes, I gave her permission to crash the car into the car in front of her. Anything that would bring police. And then the third thing I told her is, if somebody puts you in the trunk of a car, that might feel like the scariest thing in the world. But here's a secret. Did you know that these lights that are lighting up, those can be kicked out from the inside? And then you can put your hand out and wave at the car behind you, and they will immediately know this isn't right. There shouldn't be a little hand coming out of the trunk, and they will call the police. So what I did is, while I was giving her the realities of the world, some of the scariest thoughts and realities in the world, I was giving her tools to deal with those at the exact same time. And I was teaching her that the moment she has a sixth sense, a gut instinct, or an intuition that she is unsafe, she is allowed to pull out all the stops, all of them, to get help, use her voice, use her body to kick and thrash and scream, use her intellect to problem solve in the moment about how she can keep herself from being put into any further danger. Listen, when somebody goes to abduct children, they want the easiest, most compliant kid they can get. So you make yourself the most difficult, non-compliant kid on the planet. And just remember, you do not have to be respectful or polite or kind or appropriate in that moment. Honestly, I think Em spent a few years of her life wishing somebody would try to abduct her from the grocery store so that she could pull everything off the shelves. Thank God it never happened. However, she did have a run in with a couple who wanted her to get in a van, a very shady looking van. It's her freshman year of high school, so she would have been 12 or 13. And Emily was a cheerleader, so she was walking home from cheerleading practice. And we lived in a very nice, affluent western suburb of Chicago at the time, Naperville. And so she was perfectly safe as a general rule walking home from school. It was, early evening, it was still light, and a van began to kind of trail her. She was walking on the sidewalk and she noticed it, and immediately her instinct went into high alert because she had been taught to recognize and immediately trust her instinct. And she right away started moving away from that van toward the backyards of nearby houses. And the van stopped. It was a man and a woman. And the woman rolled her window down, and I believe they were asking her for directions, but she just began to ignore them and walk away. She did not engage in conversation with them. That woman opened her door and stepped out of the van and was loudly trying to compel Emily to come and talk to her about directions. We need to know how to get here. But Em had been told at that point for 10 years, adults never ask children for help. If an adult needs to know something, they're not going to find a 12 or 13-year-old to give them directions. She knew there was something really janky about what was going on. And she broke into a full sprint, jumping fences and clomping through flower beds, which is something she would not normally do, but she knew she was allowed to break all the rules to get herself to safety. She went sideways, perpendicular from where they were, so they could not follow her unless they ran, and just basically got into that neighborhood over there and then made her way home to me safely. And we treated it very seriously. We took her to the police station. She filed a report. They had a sketch artist come in. We validated her instinct, her intuition. Now, how did I know to do this? Well, I had a very similar situation when I was a kid. While my parents had not quite as intentionally walked me through these things, they had always validated my intelligence. They had always told me I was a smart girl. And somehow, instinctively, I knew to trust my intuition for the most part. One day, while my parents were both working, um, my older sister was supposed to be at home taking care of me, and I was over at a friend's house. And a guy with dark glasses got out of an orange VW Beetle and beckoned to us to come. And it was very much like, "Hey, girls, come over here." It was shady as all get out. And my friend lived right there. And it would have been 10 kinds of smart and amazing if I had just run into her house. But I panicked and I ran all the way home. And at home, I found a note on the door because my older sister had gone with some friends to the carnival that had come to town. And so she had walked about a mile away to this little carnival. So I went to our neighbor's house. I was maybe, I want to say 6 years old when this happened, maybe 5, but I think it was 6. And I went to the neighbor's house, and this woman proceeded to tell me that she was sure it hadn't really happened, that it was all in my imagination, and that I just needed to calm down. Very 70s, right? Like, it's all in your head. This isn't really happening. Well, my parents got home and they completely believed me, called the police. We also filed a police report. And as I recall, I think there might have been some other sightings of this particular guy in this car. And I learned that day that my parents took me seriously, that I was allowed to do anything, break rules, not politely go over and talk to this adult man who had gotten out of his car, who was calling me over. I was allowed to trust my instinct to keep myself safe. And so I knew when I had my own child to teach her this. As she's gotten older and I have moved from parenting for a place of authority to parenting her for a place of influence in her life, I've continued to encourage her to trust her gut as it relates to her career, her relationships, the decisions that she makes in every area of her life. I constantly am trying to encourage her to trust that God-given instinct because it is trustworthy. And we really, as a society, if we want to be raising fearless children, we need to help our kids figure out who they were born to be. We need to help them figure out why they were put on the planet, what problem they were put here to solve, right? Those two things are identity and destiny. But this third super important element is we need to help our kids understand, partner with, totally trust, and execute decisions based on their intuition. This is something you can start doing today with your kids to help them be fearless. I want to help you help them be fearless. So I hope that there was something in here that at least makes you think and might start a conversation with your kids. And of course, if we had more time, we could talk about all of these things as it relates to the pandemic and some of the other things going on. But I really wanted to focus narrowly on their physical safety in a world where the physical safety of children is not a given anymore. It just isn't. So these are some tips that will help you give them the harsh realities of this world, but immediately empower them to walk fearlessly, even as they're walking with their eyes wide open, being very intentional, being very aware, but not having to fall into fear just because they understand that the world's kind of a scary place. Look, there's scary stuff all around us, even in my life. I just don't let fear in to rule any of my decisions. Fear doesn't get a seat at my decision-making table. I recognize all the scary stuff going on in the world. I just live fearlessly because I make my decisions from a place of knowing who I am, knowing why I am, and knowing that I've got all the tools inside of me already to make good decisions as I'm walking through and navigating my way through this world. It took me 20 years of adulthood to get here, and it's something I'm consistently honing. It's a skill I'm honing. But can you imagine if we could teach our children from the very beginning these tools to living fearlessly? They won't have to go through all the hardships, all the phobias, all the anxieties that some of us have had to go through. So thanks for listening. If you found value in this, please hit that big purple subscribe button, share this episode with a friend, and please give me a review. I'm trying to collect those reviews right now. I would love, love, love it if you would do that for me and give me feedback. So I will put in the show notes all of my links and places that you can find me. And if you have questions for me, please don't hesitate to put them out there. I do have a free Facebook group called The Fearless Revolution, and that is a great place for you to join and actually ask me questions. I do free coaching in that group as well. So if you have a particular topic that you would like me to speak on, that is where you want to put it. So I'll drop the link for that here. And I would love to interact with you, my audience, on it at a greater level than I can just with a podcast where I'm talking to you. So I appreciate you tuning in, and I hope to see you next time on The Fearless Revolution.
The Fearless Revolution has begun, and you are an important part of getting the message of fearlessness out to the world. Follow Sandy on Facebook and Instagram at The Fearless Revolution for more empowering content that will help leaders embrace the fullness of their identities, lean into their destinies, and lead fearlessly. Check out the show notes for all the links. If this podcast has impacted you, we ask that you subscribe or follow, and be sure to share with another fearless leader.